back. WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We have made the promise of wise conversations around here to go with our intelligent chats out on the internet. And, life's travels take me in interesting places. And I think I talked about this a little bit last month, but hadn't been out much at all. I mean, we've had a playground here if you haven't heard. But, I had my first shot, and my pal Leonard Raskin at Raskin Global was throwing an incredible charity golf tournament. I've been to hundreds of them over time. I've given speeches. I've shaken hands. I've thrown them. I've putted in them. I've judged par threes, the whole deal. But it felt like a new beginning, like a new awakening to be back out doing something. It was kind of like one of those moments in time at the end of the plague where I actually talked to people. And it was the weirdest thing because we were all wearing masks in the beginning and I couldn't see anybody's face, and I knew they knew me and I knew them, and my hair's grown. And by the end of the day, we're having a little post-game spread and everybody's celebrating a great day. And it was a lovely, lovely day for Mount Washington Pediatric Hospital. And I really want to sense of appreciation to Paula Bragg and our friends at Radcliffe Jewelers, Shirley. Everybody was so great that day. But I wound up having a meal and a conversation with a guy. And I know I had a snack food back when I was a kid back in the day. Sometimes that Pennsylvania border feels like a long way away. But Steve Yelland and I hit it off talking in the aftermath of a charity golf tournament. I said, dude, you ought to come on the show because this is a great story. And first off, welcome. It's good to see you, not on a golf course. And you told me you worked for a living. You swore you had an office. It's good to see you in it, Steve. How are you today?
Thank you, Nestor. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be on.
Well, we got to talking a little bit about your background. And I think when anybody mentions Hanover, Pennsylvania, or mentions that part of the world, you think snack food, you think, have I been there or have I been there lately? And I had occasion to drop a friend off who was staying with a friend up there. And I go to Hampstead a lot. I used to go to Westminster a ton, Town, been up that with Gettysburg. But I hadn't been up to your part of the world in a long time. About 2 years ago, I went up there. And it was just amazing to me how it had grown. And I guess it's the point where you can give your background a little bit, but it leads into a farming space that's right up my alley for what we always talk about in Baltimore Positive, which is feeding people, which is something I think you and your family have always done, right?
Yeah, my great grandfather Harry Wareheim started Hanover Canning Company long ago, and he had three children. And my grandfather Alan, his oldest son, took over Hanover Canning and built the
Was
business.
canning new then?
I don't know that it was new, but I don't know that it had really been done on a mass scale. So they really started canning tomatoes, and you go
This
back
is
to
early 20th century, right? 1900 something.
yeah, you're in the 1920s,
Well, I'm just
1930s.
wondering when you could put something in a can and keep it fresh, right? Like, pasteurization and like all these other things that came along. Like, your great grandfather was an incredibly prescient individual to create an industry that I still go to Wise Markets and find products in cans that I have in my kitchen that I eat, right?
Well, I think it's the whole Pennsylvania Dutch thing. It's you had a lot of industrious Germans that were coming to the country, and they sort of centralized themselves in that central Pennsylvania area, and
Fertile soil, right?
soil is a big thing, and we'll get to the soil thing, but it's always been a great growing area, and tomatoes, corn, all kinds of vegetables. And so when Alan came in and started to scale the business, and during World War II, supplied a lot of product to the troops. One of the reasons he didn't have to go to World War II is because he was running this business.
They
And
called them
really,
rations, right? Then at that point, right?
I think so. Yeah, it's
Okay.
before my time, but that's probably what they would have called it. And all canned stuff, and eventually moved into frozen vegetables. If you can remember when you were a kid, most of the time you got frozen vegetables, they were in the little boxes, and you'd find them in the freezer section. They'd all have ice frozen over top of them. They'd all be blocked into the corner. And ultimately, they moved to poly bags, Hanover Foods. He rebranded it Hanover Brands, and they would do the 1 pound poly bags of vegetables. And so over time, the business grew, and he had his three children, my mother, Sally, and Mike and John, in the business or around the business. And along the way, bought a snack food company, Snyder's of Hanover. Most people know the pretzels. And and started to scale that business as
I
well.
recognize them, especially when I have beer with them.
Yeah, they're great that way, aren't they? Yeah, I talk about it. It's funny. When I was a kid, Alan would pick me and my sister up and my cousins, and we would go to Snyder's, and at that time they didn't have the same kind of food laws that you have, and you could run around on the shop floor. And so of course they had these big ovens, and we'd run to the back of the ovens, and these hot pretzels would come out, and they're just soft, and they had all this salt on them, and man, you'd eat those things right off the back, and they were like crack. It was
Sounds
amazing.
like something I want to experience once in my life. Sounds like you had a
Yeah.
good childhood, dude.
Oh, it was good, man. And you talk about that. We used to also, he'd take us out in the fields, and the combines would do the early June peas, which are coming out now. And as kids, we'd follow behind the combines, and the vines would fall out, and there were still peas on there, and you'd pick the peas off the vines that hadn't gone into the combines for processing, and you'd end up getting a can of them. You'd take them home to mom at the end of the day, and you'd have fresh peas. So it was, like you say, it was fun. It was fun running around with my grandfather, and he was always really good with the kids about uh, being involved and being around the business. So I
But he
think
was a true farmer, though, right? Like literally, that's in that sense.
he did farm. He had a farm. One of my first jobs was on his farm, and I would help him in the asparagus garden and the tomato garden and all the vegetables he was growing. My favorite were the spring onions. I would always carry a pocket knife and cut the spring onion, and that would be my lunch with some salt. So it was a lot of fun. And so as part of that whole farming community, we purchased farmland along the way, and so nobody ever really thought much about it. I don't think. Originally you had the farmland, and you had the farmer that would come in and would farm the land for us, and Hanover Brands or Hanover Foods now would buy the green beans. So it was kind of a cool deal, and kind of a close loop process. And so fast
That's
forward,
generations. Like that went on for a long time, right?
yeah, I'm into
America didn't change as much as maybe it has lately, right? In that
that.
way, that
Yeah, yeah, and
yeah.
the family was all involved, and they were involved in different facets of the business. So it was kind of cool
You
how
were
that
not a
worked.
regional brand. You're an international brand, certainly, right? Like, just
Yeah.
because I could get your pretzels down the street, you could get them in Europe, right?
Yep. Yes. Yeah. I mean, that was really Mike, Alan's youngest son, that got that international distribution going with the Snyder's pretzels, and ultimately there was a sale. I mean, Mike passed away. He got sick, and he had done a merger with Lance, and so it became a publicly traded company. And he passed away, and then we had a sale to Campbell's, and the family basically it was a cash deal, and the family was out. So it was a great event. You diversified. There was a lot of sadness probably because it was as you talked about, it was a generational thing, and the family had been around it for 3 generations, and
When did that happen? When did that event happen?
probably happened 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago
Wow,
now.
so this is new, right? Okay, so
You lose track of time.
well,
You
family
think
members, have money and have enough to live on and whatever. Then you figure, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? I mean, I had a great family and great memories of eating spring onions, on the farm. But then you're like, all right, now what do I do with it? And I think a lot of people. I talked to Leonard Raskin. I know he's a mutual friend of ours. Talks about this all the time. That people have wealth, accumulate wealth, don't know what to do with it, don't know what to do with their time, seeking happiness, all of that. And I guess this is where you and I got into a conversation on the golf course that day about like, what do you do with all of this land and things, right? And how do you create your own thing that you want to do that's 21st century and not 20th century, right?
Yeah, I mean, you have suddenly you have this, and I was never actively in the Snyder's business. I'm involved in a number of other entities that were family related that we could talk about another time. But we had 1,600 acres of farmland. We had cash that was sitting in this entity that we have, and so one of the things that I enjoy doing, and I do a lot of, is strategic planning. So I sat down with the family and said, "Hey, what do you guys want to do here? I mean, we can liquidate, but that seems kind of like a crazy thing to do. That maybe there's a higher calling and something better that we can do." And so we put our heads together and came up with a plan, and using the money to do development in appropriate opportunities, and but then also in this land that we have to preserve the farmland, not to develop the farmland, and so since we have this farmland.
Is that unusual? That's sort of noble, right? Because usually it's just highest bidder, and then sort of local issues take over as to whether you can put that mall or that condo or whatever it is you want to build, right? Like sometimes the hardest thing in the world to do is to keep something what it what it has been, even in the middle of Pennsylvania, where, as I said, I think I began this with driving up there saying, "Holy cow, this used to be a farm, and now it's houses and there's people, and I wonder where they work, and oh, they work in Baltimore," or, like that. It's certainly, you've seen that community, you spent your whole life there. I don't think I'm saying anything. It's been 20 years since I was up there. It's changed dramatically.
It has changed dramatically, and I think that we talk about it as a family, and we talk about the importance of preserving the history of the family and talking about the history of the family and what got us where we are. And look, we may not always do the right thing, but we try to do the right thing and make sure that the farmland has been a key part of Hanover historically, and where we are. And so we want to continue to preserve that land. And I think it's important. And that's where our conversation really started to take off, because when we looked at the farmland, it was like, okay, we've had a farmer that's always come on the land, and they've done a great job. But we've never really taken a proactive approach to what that looks like. And of course, we started talking our conversation about the fact that emissions and carbon sequestration and those types of things, and how we have farmed over the last 100 years. I'm going to say, I mean, it's since World War II, I guess World War I, that we've been doing a lot more chemical inputs into our land and how we grow our vegetables, and it's just not necessarily the most healthy way to do it. And the bigger problem is our soil is disappearing. So we're farming out of dirt, and dirt is not soil. Nothing's living in dirt. And so when you have dirt, the only way you're going to grow something in dirt is to put fertilizers and herbicides and pesticides into the ground, so that you can grow things and keep things growing. And we really need to work on redeveloping our soil. It's been said that we only have 60 harvests left in our cycle with soil, and that's not a good thing. And so we've really killed all the microorganisms, the earthworms, and the things that feed on the roots in our soil, and that's what sequesters the soil and pulls soil out of the carbon. So we've really started to look at how do we work at making sure that we're putting less inputs into the ground, and ways to do that is cover cropping and really developing a mulch on top of the dirt, and redeveloping your soil should give you hopefully healthier vegetables. And there are a lot of ways to do it, and a lot of people talk about it.
Well, you hear organic, right? And my friends at Wise Markets, I talk about it all. Organic milk I have in my fridge, organic berries, the type of berries like strawberries that would be maybe susceptible to being sprayed by the wrong thing in the wrong place. I tried to grow tomatoes in my own garden, right? I've tried to, when my wife brings plants in. My dear friend Court from Sporticulture has Walnut Springs Nursery out near Frederick. Has done a lot of work with us in the sports space with sports flowers and whatnot. He would always send beautiful flowers here. He sent last year herbs, and the bugs that just come along with it. I can imagine if you're in the money of, hey, in the same way they're, I guess, shooting deer for eating the corn in the fields, you can't have things that wreck your crop. But somewhere along during our lifetime, I don't know that we've gotten this right with pesticides and what chemicals are going in here and what the word organic would mean in the modern era. It would feel to me like there's a lot of money in organic the next 25 years for the smart people and the earners and people who sustainability, all of that, right? That organic means something in the modern era beyond, oh, that's that Gucci thing my store doesn't have anymore, and it's around the corner and it's really expensive, and it's not worth it or whatever. My wife said cancer twice. It's worth it.
Yeah. Well, and I think organic has a place, and organic's great. I think the key is, to your point, less chemical inputs into the ground is going to mean less toxic things that we're eating. And so there maybe there's a little bit of a balance, because when you talk about organic, there is still tilling that goes on the ground, and tilling, the plow is really not good to put into the ground, because you're tearing up the organisms that help the plants grow and process the I think it's called glomalin, for lack of without cheating and looking in a book, but
There'll be no quiz at the end here.
yeah, thank you. So but
We
it
both can acknowledge we have more to learn.
yeah,
And we've come a
absolutely.
long way.
I know not to be dangerous after 3 books and a few classes, but it's it's really about the soil, and you have to have healthy soil to grow healthy vegetables, and to have healthy soil, everything has a place, and you really want to minimize those inputs that you're putting into the ground, um, and preserve that soil, and get that soil so that it's the best that it can possibly be, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it. So, I mean, we're looking at metrics. How do we measure all this? How do we look at this so that we know what we're looking at? And I've come up with like soil organic matter. There are people that are measuring the soil organic matter in their soil, and most farms are at 1 to 2%. And there are people out there in the country that have been doing this for a long time that are up to 6, 7, 8%. But there are a lot of ways to go about that, and there are a lot of different ways to go about it. And that's what I've really learned, is there's not necessarily any one way that's the right way, but
Is there, I was going to ask you this, because like the whole issue in this country about like trusting science and believing science, it has made me vote the direction I vote in, because I'm not anti-science, and I have no time for people that deny science. I would certainly think if you're a farmer that denies science, you're not going to be a farmer long. So I would think the science that's gone into this has at least made it 90% sort of, this is the way it works when you do this. If these conditions work in this way, we get a tomato, or we get this sort of tomato, right? I think the cannabis community's out, figuring out that part of the science with plants as well. I think we do that with cucumbers and lettuce and tomatoes and corn too, right?
yeah, I think so. I think science certainly is important. I think where we get in a problem when we talk about the science is when the politicians get involved. If we could keep the politicians out of the conversation, we could probably actually get a lot done. And it's never perfect either. I mean, there are always going to be differences of opinion in the world of science, and I think that's when you go talk to a farmer. One farmer is going to have one way of doing it, another farmer is going to have another way of doing it. Some farmers want to have cattle and animals, livestock on their soil, because that helps they defecate on the soil, it fertilizes the soil, and it tears the soil up a little bit. What you don't want to have,
as long as it's not in my backyard.
yeah, well, you don't want to have them on there all the time, because that does too much. So you got to kind of time it as to how much time they're spending on any one.
It is a science, right? Like literally.
Exactly. Another guy says, I don't want to have pigs and cows and chickens, and so they kind of do it a different way, and they focus on the cover crops a little bit more. Organic, they have to come out and they have to plow every third to fourth year, because the perennial weeds continue to come into the plot that they're growing, and that's
and wreak havoc, literally, right?
Yeah, and that's the only way they can get rid of those perennial weeds. Other people don't want to plow. They say no till, not ever going to till. That's why they use the cattle, and they'll put some inputs into the ground to make sure that those weeds don't come around. So I think it's all moderation and finding out what works best for you, and moving on from there. And I think the most important thing is keeping your eyes and ears open and listen to what people have to say. So I'm not.
Well, that's why I had you on, right? So Steve Yelland's here. If you are tuning into Baltimore Positive, another Wise Chat brought to you by our friends at Wise Markets. We're going to be getting out doing this crab cake tour. I don't know how, I'm not going to Pennsylvania for a crab cake, but I go across the border for a snack chip for sure. We're over in Hanover, Pennsylvania right now. I was at the Mount Washington Pediatric Golf Tournament with my friend Leonard Raskin. Met Steve. We had a great conversation about farming. And, I've read so much about urban farming and what's going on in Detroit and what's going on in Medellin, Columbia, and, really challenged areas. Baltimore obviously has its own challenges. It's why we created Baltimore Positive, but urban farming and feeding people, I guess at the heart of all of this, the reason I was inspired to bring you on was just sort of this calling you have as this famous family that sold out and did all this stuff that you still are like, you're up all night trying to figure out how to feed people. And when I ask you to come on the show, you're almost reluctant, being like, I don't know enough about farming. I'm just reading stuff lately. And I'm like, well, that's kind of where it all goes, right? Somebody has to take the first step to not sell it off to the next box house village in Hanover, right? Somebody has to, you've at least taken that step to say, not only do we want to farm and we might not be canning stuff anymore, but how can we make it better than my grandfather made it 100 years ago?
Absolutely. No, it's been fun, and I've actually really enjoyed it. I kid around with everybody and say I'm learning to be a farmer at 57 years old, and so that's kind of cool. I
What's
really
the thing
enjoy it.
like an idiot like me would need to know? Like, I got an uncle dies with some land and I'm like, I like cantaloupe. Let's grow cantaloupe, or whatever. And look, I'm talking about the Ocean City tour, right? I mean, I'm sure you've been to Ocean City a million times. You drive up and down, there's corn, there's peaches, there's a man behind every one of those 29-cent tomatoes you buy. There's just, I've tried to grow a patch in my garden and the rats want to get to them in East Baltimore. There's so many elements into all of that that I have incredible respect for. But more than that, I think as I get older, we all realize the humanity of somewhere out there right now, there's somebody starving, within earshot of my voice. And that's probably not the way we should be doing things here.
Yeah, it's the soil. I mean, you have to. The soil is the key. You have to have good soil, and the soil has to be living. And if you don't have living soil, uh, you're going to have to put chemicals into the ground, and that's what you're going to eat. You don't put as many chemicals into the ground. You're going to develop other flavors based on what your cover crops are, and the you talked about the birds and the animals and the insects that are around that. That's all part of the cycle. So you need pollinators. I mean, it's all connected.
Bees, we need bees, right?
We need bees.
All right, that's our next song. Next time you come on, Steve, we're going to do apiary topics. Hey, I told everybody if there's a really great apiary in like Western Maryland when I'm out on the tour, I'm all about that, man. I mean, we gotta shine a little light on important things like where our grandkids' meals are going to come from, right? They're not going to come out of a box and out of like literally. I think the science is going to lead us to that not being the best way to do this, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey man, I appreciate the visit. Tell me what you do in the real world, because you didn't even plug your primary business. You're talking about the toy department.
I have a number of wood packaging companies and a turnkey framing company, Bruce Jones Contractors, and JF Rollball is a pallet company up in Hanover. And when I'm not doing that, I'm trying to at 57 get out and mountain bike and snowboard and have a good time. So those are my extracurricular passions.
I'm going to try to zip line and fly fish this year at 52. So I'm trying to branch out a little bit and do things differently as well, right? So we're all trying to grow. Steve, it's really a pleasure to have you on the program. You've been a great guest. I hope we get snack food and fresh fruits. And I've never done the spring onion salt thing. My mom grew up in South Carolina, so she used to do like radishes and salt. So I'm familiar with the technique of it, but I've just never had a spring onion with salt on it. I'm from Dundalk. We probably would fry it, dip it and fry it. They call it an onion ring or something, right?
We'll get into the next thing the next time we talk, and we'll progress to pickled tongue.
Fried snack foods next on our menu. Steve Yelland used to sell snack foods. Now he's got pallets and wood and break it up, sell it for lumber, man. I hear it's going for a lot right now. Steve, take care of yourself. Thanks for coming on, man. You're a great guest.
Thanks, Nestor. Appreciate it.
You got Steve Yelland, a friend of Leonard Raskin. I meet interesting people through interesting people. You can always find Raskin Global, raskinglobal.com. Leonard led me to a golf course to do some good deeds with Mount Washington Pediatric Hospital, and inviting some great guests on and learning about farming and organic and important things on behalf of our friends at Wise Markets as well. And we'll be on tour crab caking very soon. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, anywhere the internet takes you, including beautiful Baltimore Inner Harbor. On sale now at Moeller & Gary Realty. We are BaltimorePositive.com.